I'm not going to be trying to pretend that I am a teacher in a war zone. At the conference itself, there's been some amazing presentations by teachers from Ukraine, by Palestinians.
Hugh Dellar from England, a co-author, teacher, and teacher trainer. With many of his reels on social media to help teachers, he is hard to miss. Add to that his main travels to Ukraine to support people. His support isn't always by speaking, but also being on the ground and participating in many activities to raise funds to help those who are on the front line defending not only Ukraine, but the whole of Europe. Something that many in Europe still can't understand how essential to the safety it is to help those men. His podcast wasn't a normal one. Let's roll.
And as you can hear off in the distance, there's yet another air raid siren. Kharkiv reality.
Hello and welcome to another Meltdown podcast. With me today, a teacher and a teacher trainer for over 3 decades, Hugh Dellar, who has co-authored over 20 books. He's also an Instagram personality. And yeah, I do watch some of his reels. Recommend you to do it. Hi, Hugh. Nice to have
Hey,
you
hello.
today.
Hey, Ellie. Thank you for inviting me.
So the first question, what's your problem with James Bond? You are a fan of Jackson Lamb.
So, slow horses. I like James Bond. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I grew up watching the James Bond movies, like most English kids of my generation. Um, I think looking at James Bond now, I think they've done a good job at kind of reinventing James Bond and making him a bit more relevant to the modern age and kind of removing some of that kind of, I guess, what would now be seen as toxic masculinity, the womanizing and all of that kind of thing. What I loved about Slow Horses was there's a whole different tradition of English spy movies. So you go right back to things like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy from the 70s, which are much more to do with this kind of dark, dingy, slightly depressing, slightly underfunded kind of world of espionage. And what I loved about Slow Horses was, I mean, the anti-heroes are kind of the heroes, really. That they're very efficient, even though they're supposed to be the mess ups. And I love this character Jackson Lamb because I love Gary Oldman. He's a London boy, and he kind of he oozes Londonness for me. And in that series, he's got to the stage of his life where he just says what the hell he wants, and he doesn't care what people think of him. And he's very entertaining. So it's not that I'm anti James Bond per se. It's just that I don't think James Bond really reflects the world of intelligence gathering and intelligence operations. And I have a friend who actually works for MI6, and I know from talking to him, a lot of the work that those guys really do is much less glamorous than the world of James Bond.
That's it. Actually, I wanted to get more information about you, but I thought, okay, I think that one you're well known, and that one really grabbed my attention. So I wanted to start with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question to
So,
start with. I wasn't expecting that one.
well, it just when I was learning more about you, I saw that reel on Instagram. So, okay,
Yeah,
maybe that's a good icebreaker. Just
good place to
with this.
start.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so don't be surprised when I ask you this question. But I'm sure many teachers, many people don't know the term lexical approach. So,
Yeah.
and I know that from my experience because I applied to many job positions and during the interview, people would ask me, how many tenses are in English? Uh, how many conditionals are in English? And so such kind of questions. And when I would say, is this really a question? Say, don't be surprised, but we have job interviews with many teachers and they don't know what it means. Also, they
Wow.
don't know how many tenses there are in English. They teach them, but they don't count them. So, how would you define this term, lexical approach?
So I guess for me, I first encountered the whole idea of the lexical approach back in 1995 because I was doing my Delta that year, and Michael Lewis's book, The Lexical Approach, came out, I think, in late 1993. And by 1995, it had been added to the Delta reading list. So I read it as part of the reading list, and it had a kind of massive impact on me. And for me, I think, part of the problem is when you're talking about an approach, it means different things to different people. And I've met lots of people who will tell me, like, oh, I'm very into the lexical approach. And we get talking about what we actually think it means, and we realize it means different things to different people. For me, it's basically an approach to language. It's a way of thinking about language and looking at language that doesn't see language as separable into grammatical structures on the one hand and single words on the other hand. It sees language much more as being often quite fixed, lots of chunks of language as being quite fixed, collocations being quite fixed, whole sentences being quite fixed, idiomatic and metaphorical phrases being quite fixed. And the way that language is fixed is different in different kinds of language. So when you're looking at journalism, you're going to have fixed bits of language that are exclusive to journalism. When you're looking at an academic essay, you're going to have fixed bits of language that are exclusive to academic writing. When you're looking at, informal business emails, there'll be fixed bits of language that recur a lot in those kind of areas. And when you're looking at everyday informal speech, there'll be fixed bits of language. So for me, it was really a way of helping me to think about language and the way language works that then had a huge impact on the way I thought about what I was doing in the classroom. Because I think when I was trained to teach, probably like a lot of teachers watching this, I was trained to think about language as grammar structures on the one hand and, vocabulary on the other hand. And I wasn't really trained to think about what do we do with that vocabulary? How does that vocabulary interact with grammar? How is this grammar used with vocabulary? What are the most common examples of this grammar? What contexts do we use this language in? How can we show students the contexts in which we use this language? So I think once I started thinking about all of that, it pushed me to change the way I was teaching, and it pushed me to start thinking about writing my own material. And I guess it helped to move me to this position where I ended up thinking about teaching lexically, which is the title of the methodology book that we co-wrote about 10 years ago. So I guess it's an approach to language, but one which has profound implications for classroom practice.
And that's how you started having the reels on Instagram, maybe to trying to help the teachers.
Yeah, yeah, and also, I mean, with the reels on Instagram, it was partly from working with a lot of high-level learners, a lot of whom are teachers themselves. And when I'm working with them and I'm teaching them, a lot of what I'm doing is hearing them say things and think, yeah, yeah, I know what you mean, but here's a more normal or a more natural way of saying that, and feeding things in. And I think for a lot of teachers, they get very good at English. Yeah, like C1, C2 level is fairly common for, especially in Europe, a lot of teachers these days. But there's always more to learn. And so it's helping teachers to be aware of, the way in which common phrases work. And it's interesting, sometimes just even simple things some people don't know how to say. So just little things like, how much do you weigh? Okay. People will often say, or even like, what do you do? People will often say things like, what's your occupation? Or, how much is your weight? Or what is your weight? Or whatever. So I think a lot of the time for people just realizing, like Michael Lewis calls them socially sanctioned sentences, which are basically like just normal ways of saying things. Because I think anyone, when you're learning a foreign language, you start to realize there are lots of different ways you could say something, but probably there's one way that most people say things, and unless somebody tells you, yeah, I know what you mean. We usually say it like this. You don't always have access to that. So I think it's also one of the ideas that was planted in my brain from reading that book was teaching the probable, not just the possible. Because, lots of things are possible in a language, but fewer things are probable. And as a language learner, you want to learn the most probable way of expressing a particular idea. Yeah. So the reels are also partly to help show people these are the most probable ways of saying things.
And of course, just like with everything, there are some difficulties when dealing with lexical approach. Would you like to mention
Hmm.
some of them?
Yeah, I think there are lots of difficulties and lots of reasons why people maybe shy away from the lexical approach. I think at lower levels, people often believe that first students have to get a solid grip on the grammar. Okay. And they believe that a kind of lexical approach is intermediate and above. For me, I think in a way it's even more important at lower levels. It just means rethinking what you think of as lexis. So for me, at a low level, lexis is often to do with little chunks or bits of language that are fully grammaticalized. So just to give one example, when I was learning Indonesian, I used to live in Indonesia in the 90s. And one of the first questions I learned to understand was, Kamu sudah tinggal di sini berapa lama? Which means, how long have you been living here? Okay? So it's a super useful question. People would ask me this all the time. And in most English classes, you don't learn that structure until maybe pre-intermediate. You've probably done 100, 150 hours of English in class before you even see this structure. Outside in the real world, people will ask you this all the time. Hello, mate, what's your name? Where are you from? How long you been living here? Or how long have you been here? It's a really common question to ask. And I would think of that at a low level as a piece of lexis, as a kind of lexical chunk, if you like, rather than as trying to teach the present perfect continuous. Because you can learn that question, how long have you been living here? Maybe how long have you been doing that? You can learn it as a fixed thing and you can use it without yet being able to do more with the present perfect continuous. So for me, when I'm kind of a low level, when I'm teaching low levels, I'm thinking a lot about learning just enough grammar and vocabulary to help you have a particular conversation. And I think one of the problems students have at low levels is they're forced to learn too much grammar. They're forced to do the present simple of the verb to be, he, she, we, they, it, positives, negatives, and questions. And so you have these course books that do these crazy things like, um, Lionel Messi is not Brazilian, he is Argentinian. Dracula is not German, he is Transylvanian. And it's like, why does an elementary learner need this? Like, when are you ever going to tell anybody this? And for me, it's just thinking about, okay, if you want to teach the negative of the verb to be, what kind of things might you say? So you might need to say, that's not right. Yeah. Or, it's not true, or it's not cheap, or it's not expensive. That's much more useful than Dracula is not German, he is Transylvanian. So I guess it's thinking about language at low levels as being grammar and vocabulary combined. And this is how I'm trying to learn Ukrainian at the moment. So I'm learning things like, "Це недорого," it's not expensive, that kind of thing. Yeah. Excuse my pronunciation. Це недалеко. It's not far, that kind of thing. Daleko. Yeah. Це недалеко. And just learning those little chunks and thinking of it like that. So I think some people get scared because they think they have to do all of the grammar structures in all the details before they can do the next ones. They also, I think, maybe get a bit intimidated by the idea of how much vocabulary there is. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of vocabulary. There's endless amount of vocabulary. No one knows all the vocabulary in English, yeah, native or non-native. So as a teacher, you have to make choices and you have to decide what's more useful and what's less useful. And I think for lots of teachers, it's easy to teach, say, 10 adjectives for describing appearance, and you match them to pictures, and you have blonde, curly, long, short, matched to hair or whatever. But from a student's point of view, what do you do with that language? What's it for? How useful is it? Why do you need to say the word curly when you're pre-intermediate? Or possibly even the word blonde? That there's so much other language that's more necessary and more useful when you're a lower level student. So I think for some teachers, the material they're using doesn't make it easy to think about language like this. They maybe feel a bit overwhelmed by the prospect of having to decide which bits of language from the vast sea of language are most useful at the moment. And maybe they're still thinking about low-level learning as being about, grammar structures and single words rather than just enough grammar and vocabulary together to have basic conversations. So I think all of those are problems. And I think teachers also worry that, students don't remember everything they've taught. When they get to high levels, they're worried that a lot of the language students are learning doesn't become active, just because it's probably never going to become active because it's probably passive vocabulary for reading or for listening to lectures or whatever. So I think there are all of those kind of issues. And I think there's a degree to which grammar gives certain kinds of teachers a degree of power, that they feel like, okay, kids, you may know new English from TikTok, but do you know what the subjunctive is? And knowing this stuff kind of makes them feel in control or makes them feel powerful in some way. The reality is we're all going to teach kids who know some language we don't know because they're watching TikTok more than us. And what? So sometimes that's interesting. Sometimes you listen to your kids speaking and you kind of go, oh, I've not heard that before. Is that a thing now? Okay. And as a teacher, you learn. But I think, you should never underestimate some teachers' desire to use grammar as a kind of weapon and a kind of a method of control and power in the classroom, which I don't think is useful, but I understand where it comes from. And some teachers are reluctant to let that go.
And that's why, if that makes you feel better, when you told me about how bad your Ukrainian pronunciation is. So let me help you. I lived in Ukraine for 8 years,
Oi.
and yeah. Uh,
And how would you say it's not expensive?
well, my next sentence would answer your question. I only speak some Ukrainian words.
Okay.
I'm a Russian phrase because we lived in Odessa and people spoke
In
Russian.
Odessa. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And in Germany, I've forgotten almost 80%
Do you
of
feel like the German is kind
of
of pushing the
Russian.
Ukrainian out?
Actually, both German and Russian are escaping from my head. So I stopped learning German. But if that makes you feel better, your pronunciation, no matter how bad it is compared to my
I'm
Ukrainian,
trying. I'm trying.
you are fluent. Compared to my to my knowledge to my Ukrainian language knowledge. Okay, I'd like to move to your series outcomes,
Yeah.
which is popular among teachers. Uh, what do you think contributed to its success?
So I think when we first started writing, we did a series called Innovations, and Innovations was very, very focused on everyday spoken language. And it was a kind of cult success where it didn't sell huge numbers of copies, but a lot of the people who bought it were they had their life changed by it. They were like, I've never seen material like this before. This is exactly what I've been looking for. But the problem is there were only 2 or 3 thousand of these people. So what we tried to do with Outcomes was to make something which allowed more mainstream teachers to feel comfortable. So when they're looking through it, they still see it has a traditional what looks like a traditional grammar syllabus. You know, they'll still see, oh, the present perfect is there and the past simple's there, and they do third conditionals here. But we also tried to combine that with a strong focus on outcomes. And this was really influenced by the Common European Framework, because when we read the Common European Framework, which applies to not only English, but, you know, all language teaching across Europe, what was really interesting for me was it didn't define level in terms of knowledge of grammar structures. It defined level in terms of what you were able to do with the language. So it would say things like, at B1, you can talk about your travel experiences, for example. Okay. And so you then start thinking, well, do most course books do this? Not really. What lots of course books do is, have you ever been to? Yes, I have. No, I haven't. I went there last year. Okay. They use it as an excuse to teach present perfect simple and past simple, which is fine. That's obviously part of what you're doing when you're talking about your travel experiences, but you're doing so much more. You know, you have to think about, well, what is it you're saying about your travel experiences? What else do you need? So you need things like, what was it like? What was the food like? What was the weather like? What were the people like? You need all that little extra bit of the conversation. You might need things like, who did you go with? How long were you there for? Um, you might need things like, wow, that sounds amazing. Oh, that sounds terrible. You might need little responses like that. You might also need things like, you know, have you ever been to blah, blah, blah? No, never, but I'd love to. No, never. It doesn't really appeal to me. You know, no, never, but a friend of mine has, and she said it was great. So it's thinking more about not just what grammar can we teach here, but what does a conversation at this level that helps you achieve this communicative outcome look like? So I think what we did was we managed to think seriously about the Common European Framework can-do statements and think about, okay, if that's where we want to get to, if that's the destination, how do we work back from there? How do we show students this is what these conversations look like? This is the grammar that you might hear being used here that's new for you. This is some vocabulary that you might need when you're having this conversation. Now listen to a couple of conversations. Now you try and have a similar conversation yourself. And I think that was quite unusual. I don't think anyone had really done that before in the way that we did it, which I think is part of the appeal. And I think the name was lucky because Common European Framework is all about communicative outcomes. And we wrote a book called Outcomes. So in a way, it was clever branding and a clever name as well. I'd like to think also on top of that, the topics and the way we approach them feel contemporary, feel relevant, they feel personally meaningful.
Well, actually, that's my next question about the topics and the level. How do you choose them?
So I guess what we do is whatever level we're teaching, we sit down and we think, okay, so we're going to do a unit on food at pre-intermediate. Okay. Well, what are the most common conversations that you might need to have as a pre-intermediate student about food? Why do you need this? What are you going to talk about? So probably you might talk about restaurants. You might need to deal with restaurants. You need to deal with menus. You need to order things. Maybe you need to ask for things in restaurants. You might need to talk about things you don't eat for different reasons. You know, like I don't eat pork, it's against my religion. I don't eat meat, I'm vegetarian. I can't eat bread, I'm allergic to it. You know, there'll be things like that. So, okay, maybe that's the main conversation page. So then we need a listening and we need a reading because we have double pages based around these. At this level, what kind of things might students read about food? Okay, well, it might be simple kind of stripped down news stories, or it might be bloggers writing reviews of restaurants. Which one's most likely? Okay, let's go with bloggers writing reviews of restaurants. And then what you have is like four kind of, we write them ourselves so we can choose the language that goes into them, but we hope they look realistic. I think everyone's had that experience of kind of looking through reviews to decide where to go and eat. So, You have that, and then you have a real world task. Which restaurant would you choose to go to? Why? Now write a review of somewhere that you've been to. Then maybe for the listening, you perhaps have people talking about different experiences of food, and you get them to talk about their own experiences of food. So it might be one person talking about how they learned to cook. Okay. It might be another person talking about, getting food poisoning when they were on holiday. It might be another person talking about eating at their grandmother's house to the point where they felt like they were going to explode, and you try to make sure there are things that different people can relate to. So that sometimes you have a class and you have like a middle-aged Somali woman, a young Japanese woman, and they hear the listening and they both say, "Oh, that's like eating with my grandmother," because lots of people have that experience of eating with your grandparents where they're pushing food on you. And you then have a little conversation about what kind of food did your grandmother cook for you? What about you in Somalia? And you have that conversation. So I think it's looking for things that are contemporary, things that match what they might speak about or hear or read in the real world, and always using those as ways of helping to have interesting conversations in the classroom. And then within that, there's a lot of recycling of the vocabulary and a lot of recycling of the grammar, you know. So, I mean, I've just been, one of the things I'm doing for my Ukrainian is I'm translating elementary, beginner level outcomes into Ukrainian. And it's really interesting for me doing it because you start to see the same kind of vocabulary recur. So, in unit one, you get not. So you get these little sentences like it's not right, it's not hot, it's not expensive, it's not good. Unit two, you have it's expensive. Okay. So immediately there's this recycling of language. And what we've tried to do a lot is think about how we can revisit language we've already presented again and again and again so that students get these kind of repeated encounters with important vocabulary, as you do in the real world. You hear that the reason frequent words are frequent is because we use them frequently and you hear them a lot. So you need to get to grips with those words early on.
Okay, so if we move to the trend today, the
Yeah.
AI,
Uh-huh.
everywhere you go, the videos, the photos, some people can recognize it's IIT's IT. It's AI, sorry. I mean, they are related somehow. Um, how do you describe your relationship with the AI today? Do you think it really helps, or it's a help? It's like putting poison in honey. It's sweet, but it's poisonous. Turns us into
I
lazy
like this
humans.
metaphor, Ellie. I
Yeah,
like the poison in honey metaphor.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so I think AI is very dangerous myself. And I can see the advantages. I can see the honey. I can see the way it's being sold to people. Um, I think there's different kinds of AI, okay? And I think if we're talking about something like predictive AI, where, I know people who are doctors and I know that AI has revolutionized the way they work because they can feed in the results of a blood test and it can predict the likelihood of that person developing cancer far more accurately, say, than doctors on their own could do, or the old-fashioned computer programs could do. So, in terms of being able to predict things, I think it's very, very useful, and it's obviously got massive applications. And I know there are like military applications. I know for Ukraine, using AI-powered drones has become a massively important part of defending the country. So I'm not completely anti-AI. Um, where I think it's very, very dangerous is obviously there's the disinformation side of things. So we're being exposed to videos. You've got the at the moment the whole scandal around Elon Musk and X and Grok allowing users to put women's faces in and produce pornographic images, or kids' faces into it and produce pornographic images, which are apparently very realistic. So obviously that whole side of it is really, really dangerous, I think. I think there's also a kind of danger of just killing what makes us human, you know? So for me, when I see all these videos on YouTube about, the Beatles, if they'd been a punk band in 1977, Sergeant Pepper's by the Beatles, if it had been recorded in 1954, I understand why people choose to listen to those things. But what you're doing when you do that is you're encouraging the plagiarism of human creativity to be scraped by computer algorithms and represented to you as something novel. And it's not, it's plagiarism. It's essentially just plagiarizing all of previous human creativity. And I worry that what we lose with all of that is what makes us human, which is our own peculiar individuality, our quirks, our mistakes, our oddness, our own, individualness. And in terms of teaching, I mean, I know a lot of teachers use it. I know it supposedly saves people time. What it does again is plagiarize what already exists and reduces it down to a kind of common level of mush. So I could put into the computer to AI, ChatGPT, write me a C1 level lesson based around the topic of food, and it would present me with a kind of bog standard CELTA level kind of, pretty dull lesson around the topic of food. Um, if you're happy being mediocre, that's fine. If you're saying having an unprincipled, computer-driven approach to your teaching is what you want, that's fine. Good luck to you. For me, it erases what makes us human and what makes education most interesting, which is to do with the interaction between the people in the room and the material and the language and the ideas that emerge. And, I know from looking at AI just for language learning, it can help you a little bit. I can go onto ChatGPT and I can have a very basic conversation in Ukrainian, say, for example, but it will never tell me anything interesting. If I say last weekend I did this, it will never be able to say to me, oh, you've reminded me of something I did last year, because it didn't do anything, because it's not real. And so I think I worry about all kinds of levels of things around AI. I worry about the biases. I worry about the fact most of it is owned by people in Silicon Valley who are happy to bow down to King Trump. And I don't trust their motives. And I don't like the business models. I don't like the way they've all become billionaires whilst musicians can't make a living anymore. Writers can't make a living anymore. I think there's so many things wrong with the whole model around it. What is interesting, I think, is, and that maybe gives me hope, I think in Europe, in France, in the UK, in Germany, we're starting to see a different kind of approach to AI developing. And I think, in a way, whoever owns the future of AI owns the future in lots of ways, because we're seeing much tighter regulation of AI. We're seeing a focus on developing our own kind of European ethical AIs. We're taking more seriously the issues of bias, disinformation, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, all that kind of stuff, and trying to address how we think about AI in those terms. So I have some hope that we'll see more principled, more ethical, more kind of community rooted AI developing in future, but maybe only in Europe. Maybe Europe's going to be the place where this happens. We'll see. But I don't use it in my own teaching, and I don't use it to write. I don't use it to generate ideas, because I have a brain. And I like to use it, and I worry. I mean, with my kids as well, I've got two kids. I don't let my kids use ChatGPT or Google AI for their homework or anything, because I want them to learn to do things properly. And I don't want them just to accept what an AI tells them is the truth when it might not be the truth. So I think kids need to learn all that stuff. It's part of their own kind of digital literacy and study skill learning abilities. I guess
That's
one final thing is maybe teachers need to. I think one thing that will happen with AI, well, it's already happening, is it's replacing the kind of low-hanging fruit of the teaching profession. So I know, like in some Japanese high schools, for example, they've done away with face-to-face English classes and they're switching to having kids just spend their English classes chatting online to AI chatbots. Okay, so that's going to happen. You're going to get certain kinds of low-level teaching competencies replaced by AI chatbots. And I think for teachers out there watching this, you want to be thinking about what it is you do and what it is that makes human interaction in classrooms special that can't be replaced by AI. Okay. I did a talk about this at Poland IATEFL last year called Surviving the AI Apocalypse. And it was basically about what is it we can do that AI can't, and what is it we need to be thinking about getting better at doing that's going to make us that's going to allow us to continue to be employable in an age where there's a drive. Some schools will just replace teachers with AI because they'll think they're saving money and they don't have to deal with humans and unions and pay sick pay and pensions and all of that kind of thing. So it's thinking about what is it we do that makes us special. And, I would urge all teachers, rather than just continue rushing towards AI, be aware of the fact that the people who run the big IA companies, particularly the American ones, want to replace you. Okay, they want your institutions to get rid of you and to bring in AI. And what is it that you can do that will make that a bad idea for your institutions? Maybe
Actually,
just a,
speaking of replacing things, that takes us to the next term, actually, which is native speakerism. Yeah, like replacing good teachers with native speakers, even if the native speaker himself or herself isn't teacher. So you're native speaker of English
yeah,
yourself.
I
Uh,
am.
yeah, some people say that this native speakerism destroys the future of teachers who have the potential of
Yeah.
becoming really good teachers. Some others say, no, we do need the native speakers because even if they are not teachers themselves, because they don't differentiate between the two terms. Uh, do you have something to say about that?
Oh yes. Um, I'm in the first camp. I think that native speakerism, I mean, it depresses me and shocks me to see how prevalent it still is and how prevalent this desire to have native speakers in the classroom still is. And I think it creates massive inferiority complexes and insecurities in really, really amazing so-called non-native speaker teachers. I think the whole myth of native speakerism is based on several kind of false premises. I think there's this idea that somehow native speakers automatically possess incredible awareness of language, which is complete nonsense. I mean, when I first started teaching, I come from an English literature background. I did English literature as my degree. But when I started teaching English, I didn't really understand what I was teaching. I didn't understand the way the language worked. I'd never really learned a foreign language properly myself. So, here I was as a teacher telling people how to do something that I'd never done myself. Every single non-native speaker teacher you meet has learned English. Okay. And if you're working particularly with students who share the same first language as you recognize the problems that they're having because you've been through those problems yourself. You'll kind of know, as an Arabic speaker, you're having this problem. Trust me, I know, I've been there. Oh, as a French speaker, yeah, of course you're going to make this mistake. Trust me, I've been there. So you're already a kind of a more realistic role model for your learners. You've had the experience of learning a foreign language that a lot of native speakers don't have. On top of that, I mean, my language awareness and my knowledge of how language works has developed massively over 30 years. Just like every non-native speaker teacher who stays in the classroom, their knowledge develops massively because teaching forces you to think about language. Yeah. And the questions students ask force you to think about language. And if you just take your average native speaker off the street, whatever they are, whether they're an architect or a bus driver or a nurse or whatever, and you ask them the answer to a question, you're going to get 10 radically different answers from 10 different native speakers. You will not get this kind of unique native speaker wisdom. I think it's also worth recognizing that everybody has their own English. Okay. We're talking to each other. I know English isn't your first language, but we're talking to each other and we understand each other and we can communicate using English. But just like everybody else, you will have some elements of your English that are unique to you, and I have some elements of my English that are unique to me. You might have some things you know in English that I don't know. I mean, my wife is Indonesian originally, and she's a potter, like a ceramicist, and she knows a whole load of vocabulary in this field that I don't understand. So when I hear her talking to a German friend who's also a ceramicist, they have language in English that they use that I don't know as a native speaker. So, if you're teaching English for ceramicists, who's a better teacher, her or me? I mean, I don't know the language. She knows the language. So we've all got limitations and we've all got our own restrictions. The idea that you have to have a native speaker to know what's correct in an internet age is also just nonsense. I mean, non-native teachers do what native teachers do if they're good. If you have a question you're not sure of, you go onto the internet, you ask on forums, you go to corpora, you check frequency, you look for examples, you look in good dictionaries, you think about the language yourself, you see how it's used, and you bring that information into the classroom. And I think every good teacher, whatever their first language or second language or third language, if you're a language teacher, this is what you do. I mean, this has never stopped for me. This week I got asked about the difference between repercussion, implication, and consequence. It's a killer question. It's such a difficult question. And what I do now is what every good teacher should do, which is to say, that's a really good question. I'm not sure of the answer. I need time to think about it. Let me go away. Let me look up some examples. Let me see how they work. Let me see what the dictionaries say, and I'll get back to you. And once you do that, next time you're asked that question, if you're ever asked that question again, you've got a better answer because you've learned through the experience of teaching. And I think it's really, I know from lots and lots of non-native speaker teachers, this kind of self-loathing or this insecurity or this desire to pretend that you're not really Polish or you're not really Ukrainian or whatever, because you feel that somehow people will respect you more if you're a native speaker. When I started out as a young native speaker teacher, I really didn't know what I was doing. I mean, the first 2 or 3 years of teaching, it was chaotic. It was a mess. I was making mistakes all over the place. It took me 6 or 7 years to get to a stage where I felt like, so this is teaching. And to feel comfortable with myself and the classroom and the interaction and the language and just how to teach the language and how to explain things. And so I think we should all be, anytime we see any advert saying native speaker wanted, we should just be shouting out loud, European Union law doesn't allow discrimination on the basis of nationality.
Yeah, but
It's illegal in
the
Europe to
schools
do
now
this.
they try to somehow go around and say, yeah, we
Native
didn't ask
level.
for a native speaker, we asked for a person who knows the culture.
What is the culture? What does it mean?
It's the
Which
same as a
culture?
native speaker, but just
I
to,
mean,
avoid.
when I hear natives say, I know the culture, I'm like, well, what is the culture? What is it you're saying you know? Because we all grow up in different cultural worlds. So for me, the culture when I was growing up was to do with music, underground culture. It was to do with growing up in a post-punk era. I was growing up under Thatcher. So there was a whole load of political stuff going on. There was the miners' strikes going on. That is that the culture, or is it something else? Every person you meet of different ages from different places will have different ideas of what the culture is. Plus, I mean, when you're teaching English, why do you need to teach the culture, whatever you think the culture is? I mean, you're teaching language. You're teaching expressions. You're teaching There might be some idioms, for example. Okay, you might teach we had to pay through the nose for that, and maybe you can be a native or a non-native. You might know that 800 years ago in the UK, if you didn't pay your taxes, some guy would come around and cut your nose open. Okay, this is what used to happen. Um, Classy. And so this expression, pay through the nose, comes from that. You don't have to be a native speaker to know that. Lots of native speakers won't know that. I didn't know that when I started teaching. I only know it because one of my students once said, "Where does it come from, this expression?" And I had to sort of go, I don't know, from English. Yes, but why? And you go away and you look it up and you kind of go, okay, interesting. But a Polish teacher could Google that, or a Syrian teacher could Google that and could tell the same information. I wasn't born knowing this because I grew up in England. So I think this whole idea of I know the culture. Well, which culture? And how does that help you as a teacher? Lots of non-natives know lots of things about the UK too, or about America too. Lots of non-natives have spent lots of time here, and maybe they think about the culture in an interesting and different way because they're outsiders. Maybe they see things that I don't see here. So yeah, I don't buy that argument at all.
No, that's native speaker in disguise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand what you said about studying. You studied English literature in Westminster.
No, I did my CELTA at Westminster College.
Okay.
I studied English literature at Goldsmiths College, part of the University of London
Yeah,
in
my higher
South.
education is also English literature and language.
Okay,
That's my higher education.
okay. So you know
Uh,
the culture too.
I know the culture, and I was surprised because I spent 7 years studying at studying at university, but mostly so Shakespeare, and I hate Shakespeare. I'm more than I like Christopher Marlowe more than Shakespeare.
Okay.
The history of England, the poetry and stuff like that, and I always ask myself, why the hell am I studying this? What
Yeah.
for? We had one subject in the fourth year, the second semester, which was teaching methods, and that was it.
Left it late.
Yeah. So when I started teaching, so oh well, I have to pay attention to how long I speak. Oh, okay, that's new. That's new for
Yeah.
me. Yeah. So as you said, totally agree because I have experienced this myself. That
I
totally different.
think one other thing to say is, I mean, for me, when I see people advertising themselves as a native speaker, I automatically think, is that all you've got? All you've got is your passport. Like, I would never advertise myself and have never advertised myself as I'm a native speaker teacher. It's that I'm a teacher. The reason I'm a good teacher isn't because I was born in England. The reason I'm a good teacher is because I've spent 30 years teaching and thinking about teaching and talking about teaching. And you could be Polish or Greek or Romanian or Peruvian and spend 30 years teaching and thinking about teaching and be an equally good teacher. It's nothing to do with my passport. So for me, I would say to anyone watching, don't trust anyone who advertises themselves as a native speaker teacher because a passport is not a qualification. You
I
know,
agree.
it's
I agree. Okay. I know I would like to move to Ukraine. I know you're a big supporter
yeah,
of
yeah.
Ukraine. Before we dig into your what you do and your support for Ukraine and Ukrainian teachers, before the morning of February 24th, 2022, had you had any thoughts that a real war would start, or you said, no, it's just news, nothing gonna happen, 21st century? What
Um,
thoughts did you have?
I thought it might happen. I was aware of the huge troop build-ups on the border. I was also kind of not as aware as I should have been, but I was aware of Russia's military aggression in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Syria. I was aware of the fact that, there was this kind of proxy war going on in Donbass. I knew about the annexation of Crimea. I, I didn't feel it was inevitable. I thought part of it might be some kind of saber rattling, strong arm kind of negotiation tactic. Um, and I remember waking up on that morning and the kind of sick feeling in my stomach as I realized what was actually happening. Um, like a lot of my Ukrainian friends, I kind of didn't completely believe it would happen, but at the same time, it wasn't completely out of the blue. It wasn't a complete surprise to me. So I guess a mixture of both.
I see. I see. Well, as a Syrian, I felt it coming.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
guess
felt it
Syrians
coming.
have seen all too clearly what Russia is capable of
Well,
doing.
actually, I live to the coast. I come from a small city. In Syrian standards, it's a city. It's mostly a small Christian community.
Okay,
I'm Christian myself, and
okay,
we only suffer the economical situation and no electricity, but we were rather safe.
yeah. I mean,
But
compared to being in Aleppo or something.
yeah,
Yeah,
Aleppo, Syria, to the south, yeah. But uh, sometimes you have to say yes to everything, and the only thing left for you is just to go somewhere else. Anyway,
yeah,
um,
understood.
so you were in Odessa 3 months ago, and
In March last year.
in
Yeah.
March, and as far as I know about you, that wasn't your first. It wasn't your first visit. So
No, God, no, no.
yeah, before I ask you about what you do there, this is the second question about your activities in Ukraine. The first question is, how does your family react to the fact that you are physically in a war zone? How do they cope with it?
Remarkably calmly. I think my wife and kids, they know what I'm like and they know who I am. And I've been to lots of crazy places generally for work over the years. I mean, I was in Syria 6 months before the war started in Syria and came back from Syria kind of saying, we should go on holiday to Aleppo. It was amazing.
But
And so
you were in Aleppo.
I was in Damascus and Aleppo 6 months before the uprising began.
Okay.
Um, And yeah, I came back thinking I wanted to go on holiday there. Maybe not yet. Um, so that they kind of know that I've traveled a lot to lots of strange places and had lots of adventures along the way. They also know that even if they said don't go, I'm going to go anyway. They know that I'm not, I told them it's like the chances of actually being injured or dying in those situations are minimal, actually, because you're in a big city. Like I was in Kharkiv in March, and Kharkiv's a city of about 1 million people. You know that maybe two or three people might die on any given day, but that means odds of 3 in 1 million. If you told me the odds of dying today are 3 in 1 million, fine, I'll take that. It's tiny odds. Um, so I think generally they were basically like, we understand why you're doing it. We understand that you feel you need to do it. Go do it, come back, keep in touch. Remarkably calm about it. But my wife's also from Indonesia. So she grew up during a very turbulent time there. She grew up during the dictatorship. She saw the revolution happen there. She's not from a soft, easy part of the world, shall we say. She's from a kind of fairly tough part of the world as well, and she's quite a tough person. Um, so I think they understand why I felt it's important.
And how about your activities in Ukraine?
So I first went to Ukraine back in 2008 for a Ukraine TESOL conference. And I think the first time I went was to Zhytomyr. And then after that, almost every year I'd go back and I often went to the TESOL conferences. I did author tours with our distributor there, Linguist. Um, I've been in places like Donetsk in 2012. I was in Simferopol and Sebastopol in 2012 before the occupation. Went to Kharkiv, went to Lviv, went to Odessa, a few other places, Dnipro, Zaporizhia. Um, and so I knew the country quite well and I traveled around a lot. I got to know a lot of Ukrainians. At that time, I was still traveling to Russia quite a lot as well because we used to sell a lot of books there. And I went to Belarus and I went to Kazakhstan and various other, kind of post-Soviet places, if you wanted to call them that. Um, and so when the full scale, all that time I was working, I was doing presentations, I was promoting the books, I was talking at conferences, that kind of thing. Sometimes going to schools and doing some training with their teachers. Once the full scale invasion started, I then went back 3 times. I've been back 3 times. The first time I was invited by TESOL Ukraine to a conference in Lviv, and that was really amazing. I think it was the first conference they'd had with a foreign speaker since the start of the full scale invasion. That was November 2024. No, February 2024. And after that, someone said, "You've done Lviv, why don't you come to Kiev? And we'll do another conference there." So I went to Kiev. And then another guy said, "Why don't you come to Kharkiv and Odessa?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not? Come on, let's do it." And so what I'm doing there usually is talking at conferences or doing 1 or 2 day training sessions. And we're using that partly as a way to provide face-to-face training and development for Ukrainian teachers, partly as fundraising. So the first time we did Lviv, we managed to raise enough money to buy a kind of mobile shower and washing machine unit for the front line. Second time when I went back to Kiev, we raised a whole load of money for one particular battalion defending Odessa. Last time we went back, we raised money for a battalion defending Kharkiv and for a center that is kind of completely volunteer led in Kharkiv, looking after people who've been displaced by the Russian invaders. Um, Hoping to go back in March this year to Lviv and Kiev and do 2 different conferences, again, raising funds for Ukrainian armed forces and Ukrainian civil society. I've been doing a fundraiser trying to buy an SUV for a friend of mine who's actually a teacher who's now serving in the military. I mean, I think a thing a lot of people don't understand outside of Ukraine is 80–90% of the Ukrainian military are volunteers from other walks of life, from all walks of life. So you've got DJs, designers, teachers, architects, bus drivers, office clerks. It's all kinds of different people who volunteer to go and serve. And a teacher friend of mine is in a unit serving near Kharkiv, and we're trying to raise enough money to get an SUV that we can convert that can be used up there. So it's basically all of those reasons. It's to try to show solidarity with Ukrainian teachers. It's to maybe encourage other people to feel that, it might be okay for them to go to Lviv. I know last year 3 other teachers, John Hurd, Jeremy Harmer, and Jamie Keddy, went to Kiev for a conference. And I know they all phoned me before and said, "Will I be okay?" It's like, "You'll be fine." Um, Luckily, they were fine. So if it helps other people feel they can go and show support and solidarity, I think that's good. It raises money and it brings teachers together and it provides kind of much needed face-to-face communication, which I know lots of people really miss.
Well, we're actually looking for a podcast with some ladies from TESOL Ukraine. We met them
Okay.
a couple of months ago.
Ah,
Yeah. Um, how do you see Ukraine after the war? I'm not saying when do you expect it to end, because actually no one knows. And when we asked the ladies from TESOL, they said something, which me as a Syrian, I totally understand because I've been in this situation before. They said everyone on the table were insisting on one question: when do you think the war would finish?
yeah,
And the lady said, we no longer ask ourselves this question
yeah,
because no one knows. We
yeah,
just live day by day. Say that this is our lifestyle. That's how we're going to live
yeah.
this life. So my question to you is not when do you expect the war to finish. My question to you is, how do you see Ukraine
Mm,
after the war
mm.
in regarding
It's a really good
you
question, isn't it?
choose the terms yourself.
Yeah. So one quick thing about wars ending. I think one interesting thing about it is you never know you're going to win until you win. Okay, like the day before you win, you don't know you're going to win the next day. And I think one of the remarkable things about most Ukrainians I know is their desire to keep doing all of the small things that they're doing in the knowledge that they contribute towards a greater thing that will happen at some point in the future. It's obviously not inevitable they'll win, and Europe still needs to do much more. I don't think a lot of people in Europe understand the seriousness of the situation, and I don't think they understand what happens if Russia wins. I don't think they understand the implications for the whole of Europe of what would happen in that situation. I still feel very strongly Ukraine will win. I know enough Ukrainians to know how incredibly resilient and determined they are. And I know enough about Russia to know that Russia is much more fragile than it wants people to think it is. And, like all dictatorships, they maintain a grip by fear. And when they fall quickly, as we saw with Assad. I mean, if someone had
A
told you
week.
3 months before,
Well, less
a
than,
week,
yeah,
it
yeah.
was crazy, It was dunk, 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 dunk. All the dominoes went down at once. Crazy. Um, so I think after the war, Ukraine will be in an interesting place because it will finally have achieved. I think it will be part of the European Union. I think it'll be a really important part of the European Union. I think there's a very strong civil society inside Ukraine. So, I mean, you saw last year when the government tried to remove the independence of the anti-corruption department, even during the war, with missiles coming down, people are out on the streets protesting, people demonstrate. Ukrainians have this very strong tradition of if we don't like our leaders, we get out on the streets and we tell them. Um, I think there will be elections, they'll choose a new government. I think you will see more people from the military, veterans probably serving in politics. I think as they move towards Europe and the European Union, this will have a positive impact on corruption, on transparency, on all those kinds of things. The further you get from the Russian world, the less corruption there will be. And the further you get from that kind of system of oligarchs and corruption and bribery, the less corruption there will be. I think a lot of people will return. I think there'll be a lot of investment. I think there's already there'll be a very strong defense industry, defense tech. There will be a very strong tech industry generally. I mean, even before the full-scale invasion, Ukraine was a real kind of tech hub. Um, and I think that Ukraine and Poland combined have the possibility to be possibly the new kind of, I don't know, moral and economic center of Europe in 30, 40 years' time, in a way that, the old center of France and Germany, I think, will be slowly overtaken by Poland and Ukraine. Um, it's obviously not going to be easy. I think English will be very important. I think the level of English in Ukraine has changed dramatically. You meet younger Ukrainians under 30, their English is amazing. Almost always they speak English. You'll have a lot of Ukrainians who have experience of living abroad, who are bilingual, trilingual. Um, you'll have all of that going on. And I feel optimistic for Ukraine. It's an incredibly beautiful country. I think people will want to go there to visit as tourists. Um, people will be inspired by what they've seen from Ukrainians. So I feel hopeful. I mean, I'm looking to spend more of my next 10 years in Ukraine and working with Ukrainians and contributing to the country because I'm very aware of what they've allowed Europe to do by defending us from the Russians.
Well, I'll be among the first to go back.
Hey,
Just one more question before we move to the last question.
yeah,
You have been to Syria, you have been to Ukraine.
yeah.
What would you choose? Syrian kitchen or Ukrainian kitchen?
um, that's a difficult question to ask me, Ellie. So I'm a vegetarian, okay? So
So am
neither
I.
cuisine, yeah, neither
Yeah.
cuisine is massively easy if you're a vegetarian. I'm going to be a diplomat here and say I like both cuisines for different reasons. I really loved the food when I was in Syria, especially Aleppo. I got taken to some really great places to eat, and the food was really, really good. But I also love Ukrainian food. and particularly kind of home cooked Ukrainian food. Um, I would cheat and say of the two, I would go for Georgian food. Um, as a vegetarian, Georgian food is just like,
Khachapuri is one of my favorites.
oh, come on, it's the best thing. But I really enjoyed the food in both countries.
Okay.
Diplomatic answer. I don't want to be put in a position
Okay,
of having to
mention one
choose.
thing you loved in Syria or one dish you loved in Ukraine.
Oh God. So I was in Syria a long time ago, 2011, 2012, and I can't remember the names of any dishes, which is a terrible
Falafel,
answer for you.
hummus,
I can't
falafel,
remember. I can't remember the
hummus.
names of what I was eating.
Okay. Ukraine,
Um, Things I love in Ukraine. So I've learned to perfect myself a really, really good vegetarian borscht. And if you can get vegetarian borscht, I love it. I mean, I love borscht generally, but it's, you don't always get it, the vegetarian version in Ukraine. Yeah, usually there's a big piece of beef in there. I love vareniki. I love those little kind of flat potato, like, I can't remember what they're called. I know they're called
draniki,
draniki.
draniki.
Yeah, I know
Yeah,
that's the Russian name for them. They've got a Ukrainian name as well that I forget.
yeah.
Yeah,
Some
but
people
like the
say
flat
so,
ones that you
Hungarian.
eat with
Yeah, I know them. I
the
know them.
sour cream and oh, love them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're making
Okay.
me hungry now.
Well, you mentioned borscht. So if you ask me between eating borscht and swimming through the Amazon full of crocodiles, I would choose the Amazon. Yeah. Okay. So the last question for the last 6 minutes. Um, Back to the reels. I have my own channel on
Okay.
YouTube. I discuss teachers' problems. I don't teach English on my channel, and I'm planning to add more content to it. But sometimes I struggle to find uh, topics. So whenever I find a topic, I need to write the ideas, then refine them, then sometimes ask ChatGPT to fix some problems. But I already have the script.
Yeah,
But sometimes I struggle with ideas,
yeah,
especially if I upload on fixed terms. How how can you, or what piece of advice can you give me or anyone who is interested in such contents about English language and
yeah,
helping
yeah.
teachers?
I
Uh,
hear you on
yeah,
struggling. So I
yeah,
think we are all the victims of very hungry algorithms which constantly need feeding if we're going to keep ourselves in the public eye. And I think anyone who is self-employed or trying to promote an organization like you are, you're constantly faced with that problem of having to keep producing more content for the machine. I guess the way I do it myself is I'm very systematic. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I do a 1 minute English reel. And I also do a longer version of the same thing that I put on YouTube. Almost always that comes from my own teaching. And so I have a list of phrases and expressions. So, I mean, I was just looking at one this morning that I'm thinking about doing for my next video. And the ones I made a note of were, have you heard anything from him? Not a peep. Okay. And that just came up in class, like, nothing, no, not a peep. And also, he sounds like a right barrel of laughs, which is always used ironically, like, he sounds terrible, he sounds awful. And so I make notes of these things when I'm teaching, and I think, oh, you didn't know that one? Okay, I'll make a video. So that's my Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Tuesday and Thursday, I always do stories about what's happening in Ukraine. I try to do human interest stories. I find those from all kinds of different sources online that I follow, from Ukrainian journalists I follow, from Ukrainian Telegram channels that I follow. Every Saturday, I do something about London. So this morning, I just had a picture that I took yesterday and the history of the place. Sometimes I do pictures of different walks around London. Sunday, I have a day off. Um, every month, I do a live with a Ukrainian teacher of English, usually who's in Ukraine, talking about what's going on where they are, how the war's affecting them, how it's affecting their teaching. And that's basically it. So I have this kind of just fixed routine. And I find because I know what I'm doing, like, okay, it's Wednesday, I need a 1 minute English video. And if it's come up in class, there's usually a story connected to it. So I try to have a little story, and I have a fixed way of doing them. So I think because I have this fixed way of doing each one, it becomes a routine. And I usually do it like I get up at 6:30, get my kids ready for school, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, I just do social media stuff. And for me personally, I feel like I need to have a fixed routine and I need to build it into my day. Um, I think the other thing is it can be very tempting to try to copy what other people are doing or to think, oh, what's the trend on English Instagram this week? My own feeling is you're better off being yourself and being true to yourself and doing things that feel right for you to do because it's easier to do them. It's easier to do them if it's just something that, generally I haven't done grammar videos, for example. Sometimes I have people write to me, can you do a video explaining the difference between the past perfect, continuous, and simple? So there's millions of those videos already on the internet. You don't need another one. I'm not going to offer you anything new in this situation. So I think just try to do things that feel natural for you and that feel true to you and build it into a routine and just say, okay, every Tuesday and Thursday I'm going to do this. And
Maybe you
this is
follow
what the
the
content's going to be.
technique, like for the lighting,
Oh God, I don't. I'm very lo-fi.
yeah,
I
but
don't
the
know if you've
ideas
noticed.
should be your own ideas.
Yeah, and with the actual technology, I mean, I don't do any extra lighting. I usually just do one take. I don't edit it. I mean,
Using the cloud, the clouds because it's cloudy here.
I'm very lo-fi. This is kind of growing up in England after punk. It's just like, just do it, just do it. You don't need it to be fancy or too expensive looking. It just needs to be real, and it needs to have emotion and humanity in it. And if you have that, no one will care if there's a shadow and there's a white spot on my nose or anything. Or if
Be a
my
human,
thumbnail.
not ChatGPT.
Yeah, and I'm not a supermodel and no one's watching my videos because I'm a hot 25-year-old or anything. So I don't have to worry about any of that. It's like just trying to keep it real and keep it true to yourself. Um, and the content will shine through.
It's good that the camera shows only the upper part. Of me at least. Okay, so Huda, thank you very much for this nice podcast, this great podcast. The second, I mean, we are at the last minute of the second link, so it rarely happens. So thank you very much
Ellie, thank you
for
so
this
much for
interesting
inviting
podcast.
me. And thank you to everyone out there who's watching this. I hope it's been interesting and helpful for you.
Thank you very much. So,
Take
dear
care.
viewers, this podcast is going to be on my own channel on Meta Podcasts in two versions, the audio version and the video version. So, I hope you enjoy this podcast and let's see each other next time with another valuable guest. Thank you.